course, one can never be sure where danger lurks. They tell me a dreadful crime was committed right in this building, but I don't think we should stay long. Something unpleasant is about to happen.
Good evening. Welcome to the Shamley Silhouette, yet another analysis of the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. I am your host, Zach Eastman. We are rolling along merrily, but unlike the recent Richard Linklater news, our merry rolling won't conclude after 20 years of filmmaking, production. He takes a lot of commitment into his films, guys. Watch Boyhood. If our take on Hitchcock lasts that long, by the way, then we've truly gone mad. But as Norman Bates says, we all go a little mad sometimes, so I guess you never truly know how far a thing can go. Before we begin, I would like to thank our previous guest, Corinne Westerman, who I had the privilege with chatting about The Lady Vanishes. It was a very nice time talking about the early British Gameau period, and it's something we need to work hard at doing more of on the show here. Hopefully we can talk stuff like The Man Who Knew Too Much and The 39 Steps, those earlier films that brought us to the attention of Hitchcock in the first place. And of course, a million thanks to Brad Haig for his hard work uploading our show onto the Real Nerds feed and for putting up with my Hitchcock insanity. Incidentally, as of this recording, Brad has just seen his first Hitchcock film this week, which was none other than North by Northwest. And he said it was a fine picture. Just fine. Here's hoping that we get him to see more of Hitchcock's vast body of work. I think he'll like Psycho. I think he'll like The Birds. But now on to today's program. In the course of this series, we have discussed Hitchcock in many aspects, whether it's the stars he worked with, his meticulous details, or the innovations he brought to the industry and the way it works today. One angle that Hitchcock worked the best in through all of his oeuvre would be elevating what some would call lowbrow subjects. This label may not be as strictly applicable today, but during his career, Hitchcock delved into subjects that were lurid and detested by what purveyors of good taste at the time would have seen as trash. Yet from the picture he considers to be his first true picture, all the way down to his penultimate work, Hitchcock has found a way to innovate and deepen many aspects of the seedy and depraved. It is safe to say, without him tackling these subjects, a lot of films that we hold dear today would not be as well-crafted and well-constructed. And four particular films in Hitchcock's career stand as marker points for his progress in this particular subject. Here to discuss them with me today is a fine gentleman who has proven his love of cinema in stride. He is the curator of Mile High Cinema, hosts Friday Night Weird at the Dairy Arts Center in Boulder, Colorado. He's the curator of the Crested Butte Film Festival, and he is the host of the upcoming podcast History of You in 5 Films. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jack Hanley.
Thank you for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here.
I am very excited that we've finally gotten you here. You prove time and again your commitment to film, whether it's through the Mile High Cinema articles that you repost, whether it's gathering all the critics together to bring out their lists and share their love of film, because there's an abundance of cinema knowledge to be had, and sometimes I think with the current range of the internet, it's very tough to have thorough discussion. I think it sometimes comes down to bullet points, but you have encouraged deeper talk, whether like the subjects are of a controversial nature or just a simple nature. I know you and I have had discussions about Tarantino that have proved most interesting, and believe me, like there are angles that I never would have figured when it comes to that subject. My favorite discussion we've had is about Brightburn. I remember you texting me going like, how was it? It's just like, well,
where do we begin?
I was like, I mean, my review of Brightburn still stands where I'm just like, wish they could have had 30 more minutes and did more stuff, but it's pretty great.
I am so with you, and I think we stand somewhat off in the minority on that.
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to look at it for what it is, because it's a quick moving picture that, like, definitely it's trying to tackle a lot, and it's also a film that I think is very hard to pitch in a studio room and, then say, okay, let's go and make this. Oh, well, it needs to be efficient enough to, be a programmer more than anything else. But
certainly, but despite its efficiency, dealt with themes and motifs that
exactly
far exceeded what it should have been for a film of that caliber. So I stand by as a fan.
Exactly. No, it's one of those films that definitely has it has more depth than it should, which not unlike the subjects we're going to talk about today. Like, it's very interesting how far we've come, where you can take subjects such as these, or even subjects that you're not even like strictly paying attention to in the immediacy of the pitch of the story, and yet we're grasping, and it's a good grasp. It's not grasping at straws. It's like a good firm grip on the subject. So we connected through Mile High Cinema, and we've known each other prior to that. But when I pitched the Hitchcock thing, you were the first one I thought of, because of the fact that your level of discussion is, I think, superb in the regards of just how you account for certain things. And when I gave you the questionnaire and you gave it back, you knew exactly what angles to cover, and we kind of came to what we're going to talk about today because of marker points. And but I want to know, as a young man or as a older man, because like not everybody gets Hitchcock right away in their lives. How do you come to Hitchcock? What's the impetus for you approaching him? Is it just a love of film, or is it just like happenstance?
Certainly, and I know from listening to your podcast that I'm going to be one of those deviation points from the birds. It seems a lot of people discovered Hitchcock through that.
Well, when you hear about birds attacking people, I think it's very easy for a 5-year-old to go, that, I want that.
So simple to get into that. But mine actually begins as a child as well, although originally from Western Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. My family relocated to a very obscure town in Central Florida, affectionately known as God's Waiting Room in this area. If that tells you the artistic.
Did Willem Dafoe hang out in a motel there?
Oh, unequivocally. But one of the benefits that I had was that my parents certainly recognized my extreme love of film at an early age, if we say that. And one of the things they did was to, given our location geographically, took me often to Universal Studios in Florida. And of course, I was in love with going to there as a young man, and encountered my favorite attraction there, which was the Alfred Hitchcock experience, which was a then kind of like a ride. And the idea of it was, you first went into this replica of the Psycho hotel and house, and you first were given a preview of a little montage of all of Hitchcock's work, and then you sat in a giant room in like a stadium seating where they recreated the shower scene in Psycho. And so they called in, like, the guest members from the audience would come up, they would shoot scenes, they would take different camera angles, and you were live there watching them replicate that scene.
Wow.
It had intros by Tony Perkins and Janet, and basically then they would replay the scene that they created for you live, so you could watch how it was done. So weirdly, my first foray, even at that level though, was just really seeing the functionality of how Hitchcock constructed cinema. Wow. And that was my first
Your childhood's
deep
way
dive.
better than mine.
That was my first deep dive into it.
My parents are idiots. They're not here right now, so I can say that out loud.
I'm going to say it freely.
Fuck them. Now, it's interesting because like I don't know if that's was that just an Orlando thing, or was that at the Hollywood one?
No, it was. I mean, as far as I know, I believe that was just the Orlando one.
Wow.
Sadly enough, I heard as of late that it was taken down in the early 2000s and replaced with a Shrek 4D experience ride. So that tells you the current state.
That fucking
the zeitgeist of our country. But it was.
Hey, the internet loves him.
So it was kind of interesting because that wasn't a personal relationship at that time with Hitchcock. So I have another film that was foundational for that. But it really just introduced me to him as a craftsman and how it was put together, which is so foundational for his work.
That's amazing. That's like it's similar to how I got introduced to Casablanca, was not from the film itself, but from the behind-the-scenes thing that happened before the movie played. And I learned every bit of secrets and knew the ending of the movie before I watched the movie. I was 10, though. I was still surprised. But, like, so then you see the craftsmanship that goes into his films, from camera angles, the way things are directed and edited. So what's the foundational Hitchcock film for you, then?
You know, my Hitchcockian baptism, if you will, I think for me really is with the film Rope, which I know we'll be discussing a bit later today. I wound up later on attending film classes at the University of Florida, from where I did my undergraduate work. And I was first introduced actually to Rear Window, I think, first. And again, I kind of viewed it more of a lesson plan in the construction of film. Hitchcock's beautiful and meticulous formalism and how he, crafted the craft of Hitchcock.
I mean, it's also an amazingly crafted story, because how on earth do you do a movie where James Stewart doesn't want to marry Grace Kelly? I mean,
it's a stretch.
It's the running theme of this show, beyond Jimmy Stewart impressions, is trying to figure out how you make that work.
Exactly. So, that was where I was first introduced to some of the films. But then I remember one night, and we kind of had like a student film society there on campus.
Right on.
And hanging out with a group of friends, I first saw Rope for the first time. And that is my first personal experience with a Hitchcock film.
Which is interesting, because it's one of the most raw experiences you get from his storytelling acumen.
Absolutely. A deviation from his body of work on one level. But to me, I read it as a horror film in the highest sense, and I still hold that it is a horror film. And I just remember being completely mesmerized by the charismatic nature of the leads, how they could hold the room discussing the murder and, more importantly, the rationalization of evil, done in such a casuality of privilege and wealth. And that rationalization of evil in that sense I found far more frightening than a typical horror trope, right?
Which is a theme that exists to this day. If you haven't seen Ready or Not yet, that whole thread is taken to the nth degree in that film. It's interesting, because we did an episode not too long ago on Rope with Henry Jarvis from Real Nerds, and he's a younger man, and we took a little bit more of a comedic approach while addressing the whole how does the experiment work from a visual and technical standpoint. So it'll be interesting to talk about Rope from a more thematical place because of the tie into our discussion.
Yeah, I found it fascinating, and it was also a time where I was mesmerized by John Dahl's performance. I mean, the way he held the screen, again, the charismatic nature. I think it is an absolute narrative, a spine toward later films like how they would work, like American Psycho, with how we deal with how the sheer force of a charismatic nature can induce evil in other people, and how we rationalize it. To me, it was a fundamental. It was an HBO film much later on that was called Conspiracy. It had Kenneth Branagh in it, and basically was just a retelling of the 1942 Wannsee Conference, in which all of these leaders of the Nazi Party essentially gathered to casually, over Wagner and Foie Gras, discuss the annihilation of over 10 million people and its rationalization. And so I became very fascinated by this idea of how we try to rationalize that in terms of being a superior, polite, elevated, intellectual culture that can then wipe away so much evil under the rug in that context.
Which is a subject that, it's incredibly prevalent today because of like terrible things that are going on. And when I watch a film like Rope, and we'll get more into it later, but when I watch a film like that, it definitely sets me on my edge because of just how it's funny, because like Brandon as a character is supremely unsettling, and yet there is a slight humanity to him in the form of his stutter. And I think it's important when you watch it that even he's not even sure of what he's doing. And John Dahl's really good at giving you that sense of, a guy who's gone through something that he wanted to do but has immediate doubt about not doubt about what he did and why he did it, but just like it's the anxiety of just like like it's not perfect enough.
Sure.
Like that, and that's scariest of all, is because that's his humanity's coming out in the worst way.
Absolutely.
But we will talk about that as we go further. And I think that by the time we come to the end of it, we will definitely have a better grasp on how Hitchcock handles situations like this. So the topic at hand is ultimately the elevation of a lowbrow genre. And I say lowbrow not in a dismissive way, but contextually, from a historical point of view, if you look at the early eras of cinema, while steeped in lurid nature, people almost immediately tried from outside forces to prevent these subjects from having any form of elevated art. You can immediately point to a Legion of Decency or the Hays Code, or which again, it's a stupid thing to make the Postmaster General head of censoring films. It doesn't make any fucking sense. God damn it, history. But also the fact that films of that earlier era, the ones that people seemed to to gravitate toward were the lurid, and it was seen as a public menace to a degree. Now, we are talking about within the beginning of this subject how it deals with Britain, and arguably Britain and the British culture, for that matter, even to this day, has more of a macabre sense. There's a little bit more of a droll and flat attitude when it comes to death. Not in the sense of it's not acknowledged, but it's just it's more accepted and handled in a different way than we deal with in America. And consequently, the humor is a lot more dark, which is something that definitely is attributed to has attributions to Hitchcock, because of the fact that you don't get something as funny as Lamb to the Slaughter on Alfred Hitchcock Presents without having a guy who can tell a good little dark joke or two.
Well, certainly.
And so, in the early beginnings of British cinema, and specifically in the early years of British Gameau and Gainsborough, you have an industry trying to figure out what it's supposed to do. And unlike film in America, where, yes, cinema starts inherently in France and with the Lumiere brothers, and then works in throughout there and their original Gameau, which, hey, go watch Be Natural, the documentary, guys. That movie's amazing, and it'll teach you a lot. But British cinema is kind of at a loss. It doesn't know how to stick its foot in something. You have other countries like America making their marker on westerns and comedies. You have German expressionism coming out of another end. You have a little bit more of a ethereal presence coming out of like Sweden and Norway. But Britain has no firm footing. They really don't know what they want in terms of their identity. If you look at the first film that Hitchcock directed, because we can't look at the second one, please find the Mountain Eagle, guys. I know it's in a basement somewhere. The first one, The Pleasure Garden, is very much a melodrama. It is not by any means a true Hitchcock film. But it shows the technical efficiency and the craftsmanship. And Hitchcock, prior to being able to direct that, worked as a title designer for famous Lasky players, and he moves over to Gainsborough and British Gameau, where he also, starts working with his future wife, Elma Revel, and does a lot of art direction, set design, and does assistant directing. So he learns the craft efficiently from a technical level, and it's only at the point when we get to 1925 where he is able to embrace things that he loved from a content sense as a child and as a young adult. Early on in his career, he wrote short, macabre stories and poems for a magazine, and then that gets transferred later into the works that he loves tackling. The first film within that oeuvre that he considers his first true picture is The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog. It's it's a film that really kind of sets the standard for a lot of different angles of cinema. You have Ivor Novello playing the lodger. The lodger is a mysterious man, comes to stay at the Bunting house, and the Bunting house is kind of a fear with panic over a killer that's stalking the streets of London in a Jack the Ripper sense called the Avenger, which when I saw, I remember the first time I saw the lodger was when I was in film school. It was on one of those crappy bootleg prints, but it said the Avenger, and I said, "Oh, I don't see Nick Fury anywhere." And that was just my dumb 20-year-old self just going like, "I'm clever." But no, it's a Jack the Ripper type killer and not Iron Man. And the suspense and tension of the film is Ivor Novello's character, the lodger, actually the Avenger? And right from the get-go, he's dealing with Jack the Ripper as a subject, and it's already lurid enough as it is to try to tackle that. But when you watch the film, and especially because of restrictions of the period, the luridness, I don't think, pops out right away to a modern viewer. One could argue that it is definitely a meticulously constructed melodrama about a man who loves a woman that he just meets, but he has a terrible secret, but he can't tell her his terrible secret, and when the secret is revealed, it's not exactly what you think it is, but it's still a secret. By the time we get to the end of the film, it is revealed that Ivor Novello's character, the lodger, is in fact the brother of the first victim of the Avenger, and he swore on his mother's deathbed that he would catch the Avenger. And it doesn't even deal necessarily with the capturing of the Avenger himself. It deals with his journey and a man falsely convicted of a crime, which is a theme that would permeate Hitchcock
it does.
the way through.
Exactly. And the idea of how society chooses to both recognize cast aspersions and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you actually brought up the idea of contextuality here. If your listeners will forgive my new historicist academic bent, you have to look at the period in which Hitchcock was literally birthed into, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he actually arrives in the world right on the cusp in Britain of the end of the Victorian era and right into the beginning of the Edwardian era. Mm-hmm. So England at that time is absolutely wrestling with the idea of what constitutes the stratification of class system and intelligentsia within its arts and entertainment, right? So you have the idea of films that are supposed to have what would be deemed highbrow art or high art, in which a larger theme, context, part of your relationship to your national history and national construct are all embedded into it, right? So there's subtext there. Whereas the genres of low art were to be content with mere reactive engagement with an audience, often at the expense of
you could call it exploitation today.
Absolutely.
I think that's definitely the term. And I'm sure if Quentin Tarantino were here, he'd say, "Yes, that's right. I dig it."
Exactly.
But you're right. It is dealing with it's breaking a boundary of what's acceptable and what's not, and it's something that permeates his career. And coming out of the Victorian era, going into the Edwardian, you do have a broader embrace of. I mean, I guess the best way to kind of pinpoint it would be stuff like a Penny Dreadful, or like Sherlock Holmes mysteries even have that bent of darkness that you wouldn't expect outside of that. And you also have early English authors kind of coming in and, even if it's not super dark, and you get the sense that people are wanting to release a lot of pent up thoughts. And it's coming out in very interesting ways. So with a film like The Lodger, it doesn't necessarily break a ground per se in that. It's been done, whether it was, but it hasn't really been done in London to the fullest extent. At least in terms of a cinematic vision.
That's right. And I mean, even though it borrows heavily from German expressionism, as we'll go into stylistically.
Oh, yeah. Caligari and this film are in love with each other.
Absolutely. and remember, Hitchcock, basically learned some of his craft there at UFA Studios. So it's
a lot from Murnau and Lang and all those wonderful giants.
But I love the fact, and you and I discussed this going into it, why I love that we're opening with The Lodger in this idea of still what would be considered within its time frame, a lower genre, rather exploitative genre, as you mentioned, kind of like with lowbrow culture. What I love about it is, and permit me to just vent on this a little bit.
Sure.
When it comes to horror, and again, with thriller, suspense, horror, of which Hitchcock is an unequivocal master of.
Yeah.
It always struck me that the European auteurs, and to a lesser extent some other international auteurs, didn't seem to ever get the memo that it's okay to work in this genre and be amazing at it.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't have the stigma that it did with American filmmakers who would relegate it to a trash genre that serious directors wouldn't ply their trade in.
Which is bullshit.
That's absolute bullshit. And, a lot of it, I think, again, it goes back to the historical context. I mean, like many things, the whole shape of culture and postmodernism begins with the utter destruction of World War I.
Yeah.
And but America and Europe have vastly different paths, right? Where America experiences death abroad.
Right.
Right. For Europe, it is the absolute and utter devastation of your homeland, your culture, your society, of the rules.
The destruction is in your face. It's present in the moment.
Absolutely.
It's not a thought that travels far away. It's immediate.
And it's that distance. It's exactly right. It's the distance of that, in the sense so that whenever the birth of the psychological thriller or psychological horror film finds itself birthed in Europe through these movements.
Exactly.
And it's because it is internalized, right? The utter destruction makes us look at where were our failures, right? The enemy was within. It was within our systems, within our structures, within ourselves.
Right.
So the idea for European directors was that horror should be an internalized study in deconstruction.
Yeah.
Whereas for a lot of American cinema early on, it's relegated to the other, the external threat, to invasions, to monsters, to things that come to us.
Differences.
Exactly right.
Differences are scary, aren't they?
Right, exactly.
And not all, and to caveat a little bit, not all of it is necessarily that, but the predominance of it
exactly.
is. It's very much. I mean, like, we talk about Universal monsters so much because that was our foundation at the time for American horror, outside of your stranded examples. But horror had a hard time in the early years kind of identifying itself in this country. And it borrows from every angle possible. Like, somebody like James Whale really likes Paul Lenny, and you have Robert Florey even getting inspirations from different angles of European and international cinema. And so within that, we've learned it's taken us way much longer to learn about how to internalize those fears and tell appropriate stories according to that internalization.
Oh, I agree. And we're in that moment now,
Exactly.
I might argue, right? We're in this new wave of horror, if you will, where, it's metaphor as monster and looking at the internal struggles of our own society as representative for that. But again, Europeans kind of knew this from the beginning, so their auteurs had absolutely no problem proudly making great art within these genres. I mean, you had like a list. You have your Polanski's, your Haneke's, your Bergman, Zavofsky, Murnau, Fritz Lang. Everyone delved into these. These great auteurs had no problem, and that is a tradition that Hitchcock is coming from that I think makes him so amazing, but different from some of these auteurs in a way, was that he has no problem learning this European auteurship and this craft and the idea of the internalization of the horror landscape through the self, which he employs brilliantly in his films, but at the same time remained a populist at heart. He remained a filmmaker who absolutely loved and was proud. I mean, his own humble roots. His father was a grocer. He definitely grew up as a Roman Catholic and of a class system in England at that time.
Working with the Jesuits, it's always a fun time.
He was fundamentally an outsider.
Yeah.
And so he took that view, and I think that this idea of operating within genres that would have been looked down upon by this highly class stratified, moralistic, and repressionistic culture at the time in the Edwardian era really is what sets him apart, and I think is a perfect launching point for why he would go into The Lodger and make that his.
Quick side note:
Yeah.
if you want a film audience that can kind of give you a sense of what might be going on in his internal clockwork, watch I Confess. That's a film that, despite the actor not listening to Hitchcock and doing the method thing, which, hey, everybody has their own thing, but those themes are directly tied into that because of how it deals with a priest who hears a confession. And but anyway, to get back to The Lodger, what's interesting about what you're saying and how he is grasping at these European roots, The Lodger is steeped in expressionist cinema.
Absolutely.
The shadows are harsh, they're angular, there's a cookie cutter on set somewhere, I know there is. But I mean, and you have innovative kind of shots that break within the tradition of established reality. One of the most iconic shots that every behind-the-scenes featurette ever shows is of the Bunting family looking up at the stairs, and then you see that through the through a glass plate that they installed, you watch him pacing the floor as if though they are able to have that X-ray vision, and just kind of like they're figuring out in their heads, what is he doing? But some of the most interesting aspects of The Lodger come from how it's immediately addressing a serial killer or a crazed killer type of atmosphere and motif, but not really. You see one or two of the killings, but you don't interact with the killer. We don't put a face to him. We know Ivor Novello as the Lodger, and our suspicions plant the face of a killer on him until the end. But we don't deal with the actual killer. We don't really deal with the psychology right away because at the time it's not necessarily there. You look at headlines from the era and the way people talked about murder back then, even up till the 50s, you have a lot of people really kind of just saying crazed killer or madman on the loose. There's no clinical term to really apply to something of the crimes of this nature. And so what he does instead is kind of he takes a melodramatic idea and turns it more into a character study of guilt, like false guilt, and internalized anger. And Ivor Novello is really good in the film because he's, it's silent acting, but he's filled with frustration. He's filled with anxiety. The scenes with the paintings on the wall and asking him to be removed. It's one of those like small ticks that he brings to a character that, while not the killer, has killer tendencies, and that's what throws us off the track.
Oh, absolutely. And an element that I really love about it is, I think, and why this would be considered. Sorry, I smacked the mic.
Oh, yeah, you're fine.
Let me just read it out.
It's been a bad boy.
Why I think this film is so foundational, why it's a perfect launching point of the four films that we kind of brought to the table here, is because of that connective tissue. Mm-hmm. He's fascinated. Hitchcock has spent a career being fascinated not only by high crime, by the how do I want to say here, the deviation of societal norms and our inner turmoil, our
certain
inner selves.
Peculiarities.
Exactly right, as he did that.
Yeah.
But not only has he been fascinated by that, but I think he's far more interested in how society views these things, right? In other words, how it affects the zeitgeist of the constructed narrative of a particular society and culture.
And particularly the mob mentality. There's
Precisely.
a lot of mob mentality. Not necessarily throughout each of the films, but there's a societal opinion that permeates throughout each of the films we're discussing, and the Lodger is very much the most externalized of that.
Absolutely, and it's first foray into that, right? It's not only, we all know of Hitchcock's basic fear and anxiety toward authority figures, but in a way, this also represents and harkens back to that idea of utter destruction post-war in Europe, of just the also failure of authoritative institutions to protect or to catch or to serve or to dole out justice. Hitchcock is also just absolutely fascinated that we allow society in so many ways to have to try to be the arbiter of how we confine our villains and demons and tormentors.
Yeah, to dictate it, and it's an issue we still deal with today. With, like, not to say that the internet is like a completely negative monster, but it has become that arbiter in a way that, let's say, the local town hall meeting might have been back about 50 years ago. And he handles society's role in this, particularly in The Lodger, I think, from a very populist, broad point of view. As we've said, and I'm glad you pointed it out, Hitchcock is a populist at the end of the day, but it doesn't deter him from knowing how to do it correctly. He's definitely he's always said, I like to play the audience like a fiddle, and that's ultimately his attraction to the art and the craft of cinema, is that he likes to see the reaction, and so he knows what the audience wants. And I think with the Lodger, and particularly in the climax where Ivor Novello is being hunted down, it's a very there's a lot of tie-in visually to a film that comes out not too long. Like not within the same time frame, which is the Phantom of the Opera, Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera, directed by Rupert Julian, who the mob mentality in that climax is very similar from a visual standpoint, but they're not. They're not influenced by each other, but it's just as if though they have the right idea about how to approach that, mob mentality. And with The Lodger, I think it's interesting how they're so quick to latch on to the scraps of information they get. And it's very relevant today. And also we have a situation of trying to process a crime so horrible. In the case of The Lodger, it's not the details are broad. They're not specific. They're not meticulous. And as we've said before, they're not clinical. And I feel like at the end of the day, you're basically trying to summarize an experience like the Jack the Ripper case in a way that the common man can understand, and that's what he does. But he approaches it from an intelligent point of view. He doesn't try to go above anybody's head.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is an event that was, foundational to the cultural zeitgeist of England at the time. It was only some 36 years removed from the last confirmed crime that this film comes out, right? So, yes, he plays with this idea wonderfully of how society's memory, its constructed memory, affects how such things are viewed, and our cultural response to these types of crimes, and ultimately terror that becomes a theme in the film.
Right.
What I love, one quote from Hitch on this is where he mentions about The Lodger that this was the first film in which he truly was allowed and asserted his style at the time. And so you're also starting to see the introductions of these themes that will be in many of the films, basically most of the films of his career. It's the introduction of the wronged man, as you said, right, of an innocent person who society still has not deemed through transference of guilt to be restituted. You also deal with the first time with the infusion of fetishism and with sexual violence alongside of sexual gratification, a theme that we'll be dealing with quite a bit, speaking here.
And I mean, with The Lodger, because of the era it's in, it's not as overt. But if you are watching the film and gathering it from the information you get, you understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
It's not there immediately. It's a silent film. You got to pay attention to it. Sorry, guys. I know it's very hard to watch black and white things that don't talk, but
well, not only being a populist, I will also assert that at heart, Hitchcock always wanted to be a silent filmmaker.
Oh yeah. Well, we've talked about pure cinema on this podcast more than I can ever thought I would, and this is his purest film in that regard because of what he accomplishes with it. It's interesting though, because in the article for Rope that I wrote, I talked a tiny bit about Hitchcock doing color for the first time, but really, the truth is, this is his first diving into the world of color because of the way the film was tinted.
Exactly.
If you watch, this is not my idea, but if you watch the Criterion version of The Lodger, which is a beautiful piece of work from a Criterion end, there is a visual essay where the narrator points out how Hitchcock communicates the feeling you're supposed to have through the way the film is tinted. And that's why the restoration of that proper tinting was important and needed to be done and brought to life by Criterion, like released by Criterion. It wasn't like, I think the BFI was the one who did the restoration. But because the tint inside the Bunting house is very warm, it's orange, or like kind of like a amberish kind of color. I'm just going to call it orange. Outside during
transition into night.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have a blue tint, like a harsh blue tint. When it's not clear what's going on, there's no tint on this particular print, possibly because it couldn't be restored. But I'd like to think it's more intentional because it's just straight up black and white. So it's a little bit more ambiguous based on the feel that we've been getting prior. So he's already experimenting with color, even though it's not a firm grasp in terms of like Technicolor, but he's also not the kind of filmmaker who's going to go and do the hand painted cells in a Méliès style.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
But regardless, he makes this film. This film, it's funny, he makes this just after The Mountain Eagle, but both have a hard time getting released because of the distributor in particular didn't think it was worth anything, but then it got kind of spread around and got to the critics, and eventually it blows him up, and Hitchcock becomes the first true voice of British cinema. This is where Britain finds its identity for filmmaking. It's not its strict identity, but it is the beginnings of how we can then blossom forward in the British film industry.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the studio hated it essentially at the beginning. They brought in the famed and noted critic Montague basically to come in and say, try to fix this, try to salvage it. And ironically enough, though, when he worked with Hitchcock, he basically loved what had already been done and only gave him some advice on some title cards and on some color tinting, as we just talked about.
Exactly.
So, as Hitchcock has said himself in various interviews, it was startling because this was a film he thought was going to end his career, and with a span of a few months, suddenly it is being hailed as the best film Britain has made.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's able from there to have, if you look at the history of it, it's not exactly carte blanche, but he is wanted. His touch is wanted all across the gamut. Right away, though, even after The Lodger, he still kind of falls into different realms of early silent cinema that are a little particularly like of the era, like Downhill and Juno and the Paycock and a lot of other like silent films that he does. The Manx Man is one in particular where they're not necessarily dealing with these lurid subjects. Like there's a human drama there, but it's very much they're stories of their time. They still work, but we consider them melodramatic or Star Wars prequels. You know, like they're just kind of they're fine. But he goes through the British Gameau period when sound does come around. It's where he's able to really flourish and shine in these lurid examples of what storytelling can be, whether it's murder, blackmail, Young and Innocent, Man Who Knew Too Much, The Lady Vanishes, even Jamaica, and to a lesser extent, where you can kind of push further into the lurid and the seedy and the grimy. He comes to America, makes films with an amphetamine addict named David O. Selznick. I'm never going to drop that. It hasn't been released yet, but my Rebecca episode is me railing against Selznick, and I think I sound like a jerk, but whatever. But he makes films with Selznick, doesn't really like the restriction about him, so he teams up with an old friend from he knew from Britain called Sidney Bernstein. Sidney Bernstein brings him over to Europe initially to help with the war effort by making a documentary called Concentration Camp Factual Survey, German Concentration Camp Factual Survey, which was supposed to be the British public's exposition to or exposing of the crimes that the Nazis committed in the concentration camps. Basically, it was supposed to be Britain's version of what George Stevens did. Exactly. When he shot films in Europe that were later used at the Nuremberg trials, and which, Stevens' film was widely circulated in a different way, but most films of the war period that were made by these filmmakers were released, but not all of them were. I mean, the biggest example is that John Huston's Let There Be Light was not allowed to be seen for years. But Hitchcock and Bernstein's film is kind of shelved after one screening, and it's mainly just it has a lot to do with holding on to different parts of Europe and dealing with the Soviet conflict within that, trying to grasp who gets what land, and it's politics and land grabbing and nonsense. But the thing that forms out of this alliance during the war is Bernstein and Hitchcock decide they want to get into business for themselves and forego the Selznicks of the world. So when Selznick's contract with Hitchcock expires, Hitchcock and Bernstein form Transatlantic Pictures, the goal being that they can do productions both in London and in America. And then they secured a distribution deal with Warner Brothers Pictures to put out the films. And the first two that they were going to do were Under Capricorn and Rope. Under Capricorn falls into a delay because of Ingrid Bergman's involvement. And so thus we get Rope first. And Rope, as I discussed a little bit on the fourth episode with Henry, has, it's an experiment. It's a technical achievement. And it's amazing how much it can hold up, even though people like to nitpick how the technical acumen doesn't hold up the way the experiment wants it to. I argue that it does. You just have to meet it on its level.
I argue the same. And in a way, too, I think that what also was great about the four films we settled on, they also sometimes often are the most dismissed of Hitchcock's films simply because they don't seem to match the Hitchcock stylism that people were comfortable with. In a way, I'm much more interested and in love with the Hitchcock films that almost don't seem like a Hitchcock film.
Yeah, I agree. It's not exactly pertaining to this, but I really like Topaz, even though nobody likes Topaz. Not even Hitchcock likes Topaz. I think you, I, and Leonard Maltin are the only ones that like Topaz.
We should form a society of some.
Yeah, the Topaz Society of Nonsense. But yes, it's a film that I think I personally feel because it's so raw in his approach, it's uncut, it's unfiltered to an extent of his technical approach that I think it throws people off a little bit. But the content is pure Hitchcock. Pure Hitchcock. A little bit of background for Rope is that it's based on a play called Rope's End by Patrick Hamilton, which in turn is obviously, if not referenced immediately, directly inspired by the Leopold and Loeb murder case in Chicago. Basically, two privileged children kill their classmate because they want to prove that they're superior. The subject has been handled in other films. I've never seen them. I don't know what their quality is by any stretch, but the concept of killing at a young age is something that's still prevalent. As I said before, with stuff like the Beware the Slender Man documentary that came out not too long ago, which people say is flawed because it doesn't talk about Slender Man, and I go, that's not the point.
That's not the point at all.
But Rope, as a film, immediately takes stuff that was in The Lodger and really pushes it. I guess if there's an in-between with Rope and The Lodger, it's Shadow of a Doubt. But Shadow of a Doubt has, I think, a different focus compared to these films that we're talking about. But
Sure.
The idea of a killer is there and expanded upon in Shadow of a Doubt. But it also has a lot to do with how it invades hometown America, and also Joseph Cotton's motivations in that film are much more ambiguous and even slightly different in terms of just it's kind of more of a money thing for him.
Right, exactly.
Even though he's clearly crazy. You have to be to work with Orson Welles, I guess.
In the best way.
That's a kind joke. I love Orson Welles. He'll be the next subject soon. But Rope is pushing boundaries on how we discuss killers killing, the way murder is talked about and philosophized about. The basic story of Rope, to reiterate for audiences, is two young men kill their classmates, stick them in a trunk, and hold a party with the young man's family and presence amongst other people in order to commit the perfect crime and get away with it, to prove their Nietzschean superiority.
Exactly right. It's Nietzschean philosophy just expounded upon, and the idea of also the absolutism of the idea that superiority and wealth determine how we can purge society.
Which is scary and haunts my nightmares
Prescient
every
and
day.
Scary as hell.
Oh yeah, it's an eternally relevant subject. Like my co-hosts, I think, got a little annoyed when I was pounding that point on the Ready or Not review, but I was just like, no, this is why it's a horror movie. It's why it's not just a thriller mystery like Clue. Like,
No, exactly.
But so approaching it the way he does, though, and I think people get distracted by the technical acumen of the film sometimes, so it's hard to really dig into this. They kind of just say, well, that story's great, but let's talk about the tech. No, let's talk about the story. Because Rope is two young men really who are inspired by Rupert Cadell, their flippant, like, bullshit professor, played wonderfully by James Stewart, and I still think one of the funniest things in the world is where he just throws his beliefs under the bus within the span of 5 seconds.
As soon as he sees
like, you're a kill. It's only because from a story point we have to make him a good guy because he's Jimmy Stewart.
Right.
But his flippancy with discussing, like, think of how much time and energy it would save if we just killed off the unnecessary people. It would
Step over your waiter with a flip of the knife blade.
Exactly. It would make standing in line for theater tickets much more bearable.
By the way, to inform your listeners, we did not practice our Stewart impressions.
No.
There was no collaboration beforehand.
We're being inhabited by his ghost in a split
Quite
format.
poorly at this stage.
Yeah, I think I could be a great Wyatt Burp from Five Will Go West. I was watching that with my nephew earlier today. That's how I know. He's going a step further, but he's not clinically diagnosing anything. Primarily because this is more dealing with a philosophy and of the privileged, and so it's hard, especially at that time, to pinpoint a clinical term. So instead it comes from a more political angle.
It does. And one thing that I really love about this film is that even though, again, as you pointed out, your source material here is 1929, and even though the Nietzschean aspect of the philosophy that's being scrutinized was present both with the original killers, it was there with the play. This film takes place post-World War II, of course.
Yeah.
And I love they have that searing moment where they actually reference Adolf Hitler and his employment of these same philosophies to bring it into its time frame politically.
It's interesting how they go, Hitler was a moron
compared
to us.
Savage, just a savage, brainless savage.
Yeah.
But another thing that I love about this that carries over from The Lodger, and so one of my favorite little small points of The Lodger is that flashing title card, right? You're introduced to like golden curls, right? And you just kind of see this flashing. Yeah. And what Hitchcock is employing there so brilliantly is his first introduction of the idea of the seductive nature of sensationalism, our approach to using lurid tales of murder and crime in a way that it allows us to project our modern fears and anxieties, kind of in a way it replaces our folklore, right? It's our modern, sadly enough, often our modern version of folklore.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But by him using that as a form of neon advertising, it makes you complicit in wanting to be a part of and a witness to and present in the story that's happening.
You're susceptible to the tactic that he's employing,
exactly,
which is something that if you do it in something that is pre the light bulb, it's a little harder to engage in it directly. So therefore, you have a specific point of view on it. And he does this also in Rope.
In Rope, absolutely.
Because Rope is a series of wonderful lighting cues happening, especially near the end. Like, and I don't say that as a joke. Like, it is. Like, from the technical acumen, real quick. Like, that lighting grid is incredible, and it sets the standard for stuff you see in the Rear Window down the line. But he uses that neon to full effect to signal different emotional cues, especially from Rupert. But also the very end of the film where it's steeped in silence.
Absolutely. Well, and again, he makes you complicit within this film. We are there from the present of the initial murder. We are watching the dinner party, and only the two killers and we, the audience, are aware of what's inside that trunk at the time, right?
Which is the ticking time bomb theory or the bomb under the table. which is at first employed in Sabotage, where Hitchcock said, "Oh, I fucked it up, didn't I? I killed that. killed that kid.
The little boy.
Why did I do that? Alma, was I drunk that night when I wrote that? No, you wrote it. Oh, well, we're all fucked. Who killed Cock Robin?" But yeah, no, he does. He uses that bomb on the table, and one of the best shots in Rope, in my opinion, is when it just moves to the chest, and the maid is gathering the stuff off the chest after the buffet's done, and he holds on that thing super long.
Absolutely.
Draws
right?
it out.
And thus the silence of our own complicity there just mirrors perfectly his political statement that he's trying to employ there post-World War II, right? Not only for Germany, but from an extension of humanity. We are often complicit in our silence at being aware that evil is there and our failure to stop it or to speak up.
Yeah. And I'll go even further. Oftentimes we feel like we have no ability to stop it. And so we kind of fall into lethargy in that degree. I feel like, when you have the sister-in-law, I believe it's the sister-in-law of Kentley's of Mr. Kentley, is basically trying to understand Cadell's position, along with everybody else in the group for that matter. But it's almost as if those characters would never be able to stop something like that because they're still not sure how to process it. So you're being thrown broad, terrible ideas within the span of an 80-minute movie. So the complicity of the audience can also be attributed to they're going to have an internal conflict in a different way, not necessarily from the philosophy, but just on how to handle it and how to react emotionally. Which I wanted to ask you, as a fan of Rope, I have the theory that the film, because of its suspenseful attributes, is actually one of the most pure forms of not just that bomb theory, but also the way he draws out suspense. It's the purest form of it. Do you feel, with your experience or others that you talk to about Rope, that it loses the viewer's interest? Because I can see how that can be an argument, and I've read different reviews that say that, but I'm like, I don't see it, because the subject that we're discussing is the attraction of the film. It is the grasp.
I agree. Wholeheartedly. It never lost it for me.
Yeah, so I don't understand how that criticism gets thrown about. I'm just like, you're talking about two guys who just put a body in a chest. Even if we already know that they did it and that's our suspension point, I want to know when the bomb's going to explode, or emotionally at the very least.
Exactly right. People literally eating off the corpse
Exactly.
in this extreme perversion of the Catholic ritualism.
He's pushing your buttons.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The transference of guilt onto the entire dinner party, my God. But no, absolutely, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that it is, for me, it proved to be the most suspenseful of most of Hitchcock's work for me, in holding me to the end and the ultimate catharsis of the film.
Exactly. And so, and by the end, you do have the insanity of his sudden belief change,
which is a valid critique.
It's actually I find it realistic, because it's one thing to talk, it's another thing to see it.
Certainly,
I've had experiences like that, and at the end of the day, like, you can't, it. Some people have said it's a little abrupt, and I'm like, yes, it is, because because of the way Stewart's playing it, but it works just fine. And by the end of it, you are kind of left with the next possible iteration of Hitchcock's understanding of how killers like this work, where it's very reactionary. I would say it's not even from the societal sense per se. It's also a personal, like, before Cadell says it's not what I'm going to do, it's what society's going to do. He's working it out. And actually, like, you don't even see the beliefs being thrown away immediately. You see him build up to a true moral standard by the end of the film because of what he's experienced. It's shock, and it's pure shock that motivates it. But you see the evolution. And it's almost like you see Hitchcock understanding more and more how to interpret this. So it goes beyond a flippant statement, a political ideal, it has truly gone beyond things that are incomprehension. So the film kind of leaves you with, okay, well, what other thing could it be? And it does become mental by the time we get to the next film. In between Rope and our next film, you have further examinations of how far this goes. Strangers on a Train, I think, is one of the
Probably
brightest
the next
examples.
logical, yeah.
And it's the beginning of the Hitchcock golden period where you have a lot of things going on in it. But I think Rope, ultimately, its beauty as a subject is that it asks us to confront our own interpretation of how we feel towards others, but not directly. Like, you have to get there. I think that because you hear a philosophy like that and you go, that's nonsense. But then you have to start looking at yourself, go like, how often do you judge people?
No, it's so true, right?
Yeah.
And it's such an audacious film. And also, as you pointed out, too, one that's also just uniquely layered with subtext and with coding. I mean, obviously, we don't speak too much on it, but I mean, just look at all the gay subtext of its cast, its screenwriter,
exactly
what Hitchcock was playing with as far as a repressive society, still, with the employment of what was acceptable to discuss,
right,
in film at that time and in society.
Yeah, and it's something, and he's not a stranger to it. The Lady Vanishes deals with it a lot with the with our two bumbling characters who want to see a cricket match, and he delves with it in another ways. Saboteur has the most interesting one where one of the villains is just like, I used to be a little boy. When I was a little boy, I had golden curls, and all the neighborhood would admire me. And I'm like, okay, neat. But with Rope, it's direct.
It is.
It's the
absolutely.
most direct you've gotten to this point, and a lot of that comes from the adaptation of the piece, not Cronin's end, but Arthur Lawrence's end.
Yes,
because you are trying to flat out interpret a British play into an American point of view, and it comes out that way. But Hitchcock doesn't shy from it. He embraces it.
Absolutely embraces it. Even though the studio at the time referred to it
as it.
We will deal with it. These characters will be it. It's
and
shocking.
Keep in mind, this is at a time when Warner Brothers was calling it before Bill Skarsgård put on some makeup and assumed Tim Curry. We have a different it now, but that was the it back then.
That was the it of the time.
Yeah,
right?
Stephen King didn't write a 1,000-page book about it, but
no. But the ultimate idea of, like I said, the outsider and the purveyor of society looking in repression that he deals with so lovingly. The initial play, as you well know, dealt with it quite openly, that our two protagonists are lovers, and that also Rupert's character is a former lover of both men.
Yeah,
it was quite open.
Which is when you watch it through Rope's lens, it's very interesting to see how Stewart's performance plays out in that respect, because it's not supremely clear, but it is. It's strange.
One brilliant little story I heard was, and it was from Lawrence's his private secretary at the time, who said, "Well, all the actors on board knew they were playing gay characters.
What was going on.
Hitchcock knew these were gay characters. We knew they were gay characters. Only Jimmy Stewart didn't realize that he was gay within the film."
Wait, what?
In other words, it was the idea.
This is in 1978, by the way. Stewart's watching it, and his grandson tells him something. What? The fuck you talking about, little boy?
Exactly right. So, I mean, but I just love that opening sequence, to do one final touch on that, of just how, and this is what I mean by the audaciousness, the playfulness.
There's a release in that scene.
Yes, I mean, you're coming in from this God shot. The drapes are closed. You hear a man cry out. You slowly go into the room, and the two men are quivering still after the act.
Which,
right?
by the way, David's body being that limp is one of the creepiest things Hitchcock's ever done in his career. It's just because of the way he's sitting on it.
Exactly. And like what Truffaut brought out from Hitchcock in their famous series of interviews was this idea and fascination, preoccupation, you might say, Hitchcock had with the idea of how close the tremble of violence and fear is to the tremble of ecstasy. Mm-hmm. And he just throws it right in your face with those two characters, right? They start panting in exhaustion after what they've done.
I need a drink.
They don't turn on the light yet and light up I mean, it's just marvelous.
Yeah.
And what Hitchcock does that so brazenly, and I would even argue lovingly with it, I thought was marvelous. It's a great.
And it and like I say, we get further sense of things he wants to elaborate on, but at the time he's dealing with knowledge that he has in immediate society, but also what his own intuition is.
That's right.
And in that in between period between now and like in the next film, he's learning more and more about it. I think a lot of how he learns to expand upon it does come from Rear Window, even though what he's dealing with in Rear Window is a big old MacGuffin, because Raymond Burr as the murderer is a huge MacGuffin compared to the actual story, which I'm not going to do the joke again, but it's the Grace Kelly thing. But that is an inherent like examination from afar. And by the time we get to 1959, going into 1960, we have a different understanding, but not by Hitchcock's doing. It comes from a little killing situation that happened in Plainfield, Wisconsin, with a little known character named Ed Gein,
yes.
Who
with some mother issues.
Yeah, killed some women, skinned them, made a suit, and inspired a generation of Buffalo Bills. You know, like it. But you know, it's a tragedy and it's a terrible thing that happened, and it inspires a macabre sense. It really breaks an illusion for this country, at the very least, if not abroad. I would imagine there's a broad kind of shock to the vulgarity of the crime, but here it breaks us a little bit, even though the details, as specific as they would get, don't come out immediately. But basic facts are heard.
That's right.
And the basic fact that we hear is a man dressed up like a woman had mother issues. Robert Bloch latches onto that, writes
right.
Psycho as more of a trashy affair with a very dark sense of humor. It's a good book. But it's decidedly not what the movie is. And Hitchcock gets it. He's really trying to deviate from the North by Northwests of it all. He makes a gamble with this story and pitches it to Paramount. Paramount says, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Which I've always said, to be fair, if I were Paramount, I'd be freaked out too, because up to that point, he'd only made 2 or 3 very successful films for them in their contract, and then everything else he did that was successful was at other studios between 1949 and 1959.
That's right.
And you want, as your last film with him, to be something successful. Instead, you get Psycho, which is successful, but Paramount doesn't benefit from it.
They really don't at all.
Yeah,
and,
because of that beautiful, beautiful deal.
Oh my God, it's so true. But what also is kind of fascinating about this one is, out of all the 4 films that all in some way deal with a sensationalized viewpoint that society holds in the fascination with real crimes that permeated, this one follows the closest to the actual events. This one is also precarious enough that, I mean, Gein is actually excerpts from his trial, and the atrocities from the trial are there in 57. The novel comes out in 59.
Yeah.
I mean, this is right in the moment of the zeitgeist surrounding this.
It's the most immediate reaction we get to a subject of this nature. And, you know, we did 2 hours and 47 minutes on Psycho, so I'm not going to recount the plot again. I will tell you that it is an amazing.
Is there a spoiler
picture
in this film?
Some dude in a dress kills some peoples and then has to go into the big room, and he says he's not going to kill a bug, and then a skull pops up in a cross montage. It's incredible. You should watch The Psychos. Tony Perkins. But I don't know what that character was, by the way, but I love it. But we deal in Psycho immediately. We get to the clinical finally. We get to a clinical approach to these lurid dark tales. Prior to Psycho, in an immediacy of just like, how do you deal with the madman killer? It's trashy, but not in a bad way. It's just that it's perceived that way. You get a lot of drive-in features of this nature, or you get horror films from Universal that are definitely on the B side not in terms of the subject, but in terms of how they're made. It's really about how they're made ultimately. The innovation of Psycho is that, what if I took a film idea that is supremely drive-in material and I make it good? Or elevate it. And I don't like the term elevation of a genre because, again, we are talking about, you know, like a subject that is universal and important. But Hitchcock does, as he does with the first 2 films and as he does now, elevates something that is supremely trashy by the context of the period. So Psycho operates, though,
as very much a crowd pleaser.
He plays it just for its base reactive nature.
Yeah, he says it's a comedy, which is correct. He says that in interviews,
right.
and it's not untrue. But it does decidedly step away from the intelligentsia of Rope and becomes much more of a, I don't want to say a potboiler, but it hooks you in. It is a horror movie. Like it has the fascination and the grasp and the attention of it, even though the most horrific horror film themed aspects don't appear until the very end. But the whole film is played out as such, even with the beginning with Marion Crane, because you are dealing with, human behavior, human compulsion, how society views a person, particularly women. We've had the discussion that Hitchcock's not always the best with women, but there are angles that you can see this from. And what's interesting is that her perception of herself from society's opinion in terms of her relationship with Sam is interesting and fascinating. And the first 40 minutes are dedicated to that notion. That, and also the fact that she steals some money from a drunk Texan. And, you get different you get different angles of society's point of view. And our previous guest on the Psycho episode did point to her as the first of the three psychos in the film because of how she is, quote unquote, acting irrationally or taking a chance or a risk or a gamble. I tend to think of it ultimately as that it's delving into a seedy type of crime noir detective story, or a Dame on the Run kind of thing before you move into the Norman Bates of it all. Because prior to that, unless you watch that fun trailer, we have no idea that Norman Bates is coming to this story.
Right. Well, and I see it on some level a little differently over there. I see that it is his ultimate condemnation of that Victorian/Edwardian sensibility. I mean, to harken back to that again, Hitchcock is steeped in a society and culture that at the time of his youth and his formative green years, his salad years, if you will, have basically...
He never ate a salad.
Basically instilled within him the idea that they still had the motif about women in society, or rather women outside the boundaries of society,
right,
under the angel of the house, right? The ultimate woman is supposed to be moral and homebound and family-oriented. So much so that later on, Virginia Woolf once famously said, it's time in society we murder the angel in the house. And in this one, we have, when you don't play the angel in the house, you get murdered.
Right.
Setting into how society condemns you, famously being one of the first employment of that great trope of when you are promiscuous, when you're outside the house, when you have independence as a woman, you are in danger by society's ultimate condemnation of death.
Which I think that some people, we talked about in the Psycho episode how horror is one of the predominant feminist genres, which it is, absolutely is. But I think that there are some, especially in the 80s, it gets misconstrued and twisted, and calls for it as a moral outrage, and rather as like, no, this is about strength. And it's pointing out something that you as society don't want to reckon with, which is that this is how you treat women when they act with independence, with beauty, and with grace, and with poise and determination. Like you punish them. It's society's fault. Society punishes them. The woman has done nothing wrong, but the moral outrage mainly comes from, I don't want my children watching Jason kill somebody in his hockey mask, which that's ridiculous. You should let your children watch it. By today's standards, it's tame.
It's so tame.
But you have also the further delving into the serial killer, and here we deal with the psychosis head on. The revelation that it's psychosis doesn't come until the end, but the beginnings of it and the way Norman acts, the way he interacts with others, the way he talks about his mother, the way he cleans up after his mother, the way he does these things that we as an audience of the era, and I think even to an extent today, not as much, we're of the perception that Norman is a poor, unfortunate, timid soul who's caught up in something he can't escape, his own private trap, if you will. We see that the trap is there, but it's not different by the time we get to the end. And ultimately, it breaks the audience's perception of who we consider a killer to be. It lends a lot of credence or at least justification to the phrase "it's the quiet ones you got to watch out for." And now whether that's true or not is case by case basis, but the bottom line is that it really and it begins ultimately the idea of the crazed serial killer, and by this point we are starting to finally understand the term serial killer from a different perspective. Around the same time, or not too long after Psycho comes out, you have the Zodiac killings start
right.
within 1968, and then by the time you move forward, you have Son of Sam and the Hillside Strangler and BTK and stuff like that, and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy. But with Psycho, you're also dealing with the immediacy of Ed Gein, and so you are trying to process, well, where does this crime come from? Which is something that he does in Rope, but from a very different angle, and it's definitely from a philosophical and sociopolitical angle. Here, it's straight up in the head.
It's an internalization.
It's the internalization,
right.
Which is the first time. I think one of the things that is, as it is a horror film, as you pointed out earlier, we nowadays are starting to internalize our stuff more. I think a lot of it begins with this, because this is one of the first horror films that internalizes it. And it's all through Norman Bates as a character.
It is. It's foundational in that sense. And I do appreciate that you're referring to it as more of a psychological horror film. I'm one of those rare minorities that doesn't like to refer to Psycho as the first slasher film. I'll also throw out that, is in contention with another great film that came out that year.
Peeping
that was
Tom.
Powell's Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
Which came out a bit earlier, which you might even be able to argue had more of a ritualization of multiple female victims, was the first employment of the final girl trope. I mean, there's a lot of other components there that are slasher-esque.
I've always felt that Peeping Tom is a little bit more of the mentality of what we consider a slasher film to be.
Exactly.
I think Psycho gets lumped in with it mainly because it does inspire, from a visual standpoint, how something like Black Christmas or Halloween gets made.
Of course.
Which is not unfair. And I would call it a
it's
granddaddy of a slasher film, but like any granddad, it's not necessarily tied in behavior-wise.
Certainly. Maybe more of a Godfather in that sense, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I harken back to, I will throw out there, it is kind of like an elevated form with that. I mean, this is a film that, through its psychological deconstruction of the interior of its antagonist here, I mean, that's far different than what's going to come out 3 years later with Blood Feast, right? I mean, no one watching Blood Feast is going to sit there and try to deconstruct, my goodness, does the upper level of the household there in Psycho, is the mother represent the superego, and Norman's on the ground floor? I mean, no one's doing that with Blood Feast, right?
No.
It is a higher level, absolutely elevated level.
Not with that. I mean, there are times when I wish I could watch The Green Inferno from a different angle, and I sometimes do. But anyway,
as we all do.
Yeah, but actually, from a serious standpoint, people should rewatch Eli Roth's films from a Hitchcock point of view, because you'd be amazed how much he gets correct. But with Psycho also, though, it is ultimately, it is still because it's the beginnings of us being able to dive into this subject more head on. It's clunky. It doesn't address the psychological nature of it necessarily in the most mature sense, but it's more mature than any other film probably would have been if you had given it to anybody else.
That's right. It's of its time.
Yeah.
And even the small gesture toward the end of having one of the detectives just claim, oh, so he's a transvestite.
Yeah.
And then having to be corrected, well, no, it's a bit more than that.
He says,
that
not exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Even that small moment is giving rise to exactly what you're talking about. It's an effort within its time frame to try to see how we can better deconstruct the criminal mind, right? Where before that in films, it's often thought of just as a moral defect, our killer, right? Or associated somehow with just like a sexual perversion rather than a mental defect, which is done for one of the first times here.
Exactly. And this film, I think from the surface level, it pushes the boundaries of what you can see on screen, which is an important part of Hitchcock's career. From our angle, though, if we're talking about the slasher film or the horror film as we saw it through most of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it does give us a place to start telling different stories, because now we have different information on the level of what will a studio put out, what will be put on a big screen, What will the public take? And then some people say it happens too abruptly. I think inch by inch on this. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre does it, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not as violent as people remember it to be.
It's nowhere near as violent.
Dude, like you could put it in black and white and show it to a child and they wouldn't get scared.
That's one.
Well, it may be debatable.
That's one where I like to talk about. Everyone can clearly remember seeing a hook protruding, but you never see it.
Yep.
It's kind of like that throwback to the idea that everyone somehow remembers. What do you call it? That the ear was cut off in Reservoir Dogs. When it wasn't, it was panned away. Which, by the way, the great Mockingjay Tarantino ripped off of Marnie, but we'll get into that some other time. That direct shot. But yeah, no, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
It's not as violent as people remember.
Right, exactly. And Psycho definitely falls into that area with the boundary pushing of violence. And he does take something that he innovates something, but also he takes something that if it were in any other person's hands at that time, it may not have been approached with the kid gloves. A lot of what Psycho's success has to do with is that shower sequence, and that shower sequence is meticulously edited, not just by George Tomasini, but also Amo Revel. A lot of what we get, not just from this film, but from the beginning to the end, well, maybe at this point, because when we get into the last film, it's not so clear, but Amo Revel is very, very much a part of how this all works. One could argue that Psycho doesn't work without Amo Revel. She's the reason a lot of the films work, but I think Psycho is very much the case because Psycho has the potential to be a disaster, and it instead becomes a film that we talk about constantly to this day, and the IP is still valuable to people because of work that she does on it. Like she was Amo Revel was an editor at Gainsborough and British Gamut, and she edited frame by frame. She got deep into there. We can do it now thanks to technology. I can press my arrow buttons and it's all set. She had to do it frame by frame by frame on these Steinbeck, these editing machines that not Steinbeck, but these editing machines of the era that are just like you're looking at them with an eyeglass and all that stuff. It's amazing how much she accomplishes, and it's interesting that that shower sequence shows nothing, as we talked about with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It shows nothing, but you think you saw something. You really think you saw something.
Well, and that's another.
You're always convinced, no matter how many times you watch it.
Of course, and that's one of the beautiful moments there too. Can we talk also just about early influences? We made the nod already to the fact that they were both steeped in their time, kind of in the art of expressionism, European expressionism, German expressionism specifically. But also we forget from an editing component that they were studying the films of the Soviet era. This was foundational to them. And so then you have this departure from Rope where we experiment with the long take, and we go to a film where our centerpiece is going to be this beautiful homage to Soviet montage.
Eisenstein is all over this, especially the shower scene.
And it's so beautifully employed.
And it's something that and now it's a foundation for, I wouldn't say all horror films, but like predominant ones that are popular and fun to watch employ this fast editing. Scream, I think, does it the best, to be honest. I think Scream does it very well. Those are very well edited films that portray the terror while also having the popcorn flavor to it that you can see. And then also I think Wes Craven did that very well in his career, was knowing when to edit, when to cut. But we have Psycho coming out in 1960. It's not received as well as some other stuff that he had been doing in the Golden Period from a critical standpoint, from a financial standpoint,
from a popular standpoint.
Buddy made bank, and you get you have this between period before, and you have this period between Psycho and the final film where he still has his touch, but then at a certain point he loses it, or at the very least he loses it with the audience. The Birds is another big success. Marnie comes out. Marnie is not received well, and there are various angles and reasons for that, which deserve its own episode, and
Absolutely.
we will be doing it. Torn Curtain and Topaz are very pedestrian. I like Topaz, and there's a great Hitchcock sequence in it, but it is admittedly light on his touch. Torn Curtain is a mess. It's watchable, but it's a mess. And by the time you get to our final film, Frenzy, Hitchcock is very much trying to say, I don't even know if he knows he's done, but I think he is trying to, at the very least, get back there, if not make one final statement. And in between that time, he has been meeting with Truffaut. He has been learning from these new wave auteurs in Europe who have really influenced him to push boundaries. There was a film he was going to do before Frenzy comes about.
Are we going to talk about Kaleidoscope?
We'll touch a little bit on Kaleidoscope. Now, I have only heard bits and portions of this. You may know a lot more. Kaleidoscope was something he pitched to Truffaut. And from what I've heard of it, it's incredibly violent and incredibly crazy. What do you know about Kaleidoscope?
Well, and I mean, it would have been that possibly like this American New Wave masterpiece that just never was.
Yeah,
right? And in some levels, I think it also is a perfect bookend to kind of like the recent release of Orson Welles. What do you got, right? Because it's the
Other Side of the Wind.
Other Side of the Wind, right?
Yeah.
So it's these two great auteurs who find themselves consistently battling the rigidity of the studio system, who are watching cinema evolve in front of their eyes,
and they're not getting to.
and they both are fearing, right, that they're going to be left behind.
Well, with Hitchcock, he never lost his ability to work with the studios. Orson Welles was fucked.
He was
Orson Welles was straight up
top down,
fucked by people all over the place, and it sucks. And consequently, The Other Side of the Wind, I think, is great, but it does you wish that people had just given him money to finish it.
Absolutely.
Because the restoration will ultimately never do the full job. Hitchcock, though, Kaleidoscope as a concept is pitched. It almost gets made at one point, and then it doesn't. Actively goes away. But then Hitchcock gets a project called Frenzy.
Yes.
Frenzy is based off the novel Goodbye Piccadilly, Farewell Leicester Square. And it's the last time he works in London. So our bookend here puts him squarely back where he begins. By the time he comes back to London, the perception of him in London is very different, because I think there's a permeating sense of betrayal, because even though he had come back to London to do other films in this in-between, he had gone off to America to make movies there and didn't really contribute to the further evolution of British cinema in a way that Powell and Pressburger do and other filmmakers over there do. And so it's sort of bittersweet.
Well, and remember, too, this is where the American New Wave movement, and for your listeners here, too, I mean, you know this about me. I am an unapologetic, oh, my goodness, how should we put this, evangelist, the zeal of the converted about the American New Wave time period. My hard assertion, and I'll fight most people on this one, is that the greatest moment in American cinema began with the bloodbath of Bonnie and Clyde in 1968.
And I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
And ended abruptly with that alien eating Reese's Pieces in 1982. And it's like, so, that middle ground there is the greatest cinema. And,
was the last gasp of breath an alien coming out of a guy's stomach in an Arctic outpost? Because that's where the hope lies.
No, that's where it was. That was, and again, yes, you have some of that convergence as the two eras, coincided where it can exist.
Fucking beer drinking alien.
But no, I mean, like, how fundamental the American New Wave movement was to all of our great, filmmakers at the time, and especially Britain watching what's happening over there. This is a moment where America, rather than Europe, is kind of shining.
Yeah.
And everything is so drastically changing. I mean, if you actually think about it in the American landscape, for those listening, what we're talking about is that wonderful movement where basically the studio system
had no idea what to do.
crumbles, and it loses its hold over so many things. They watched its core audience, whereas like the average viewing age for cinema back in the late 1950s was still like 55 years old was the average age. By the time that the advent of television came and poached that audience away, the average age of a viewer of cinema in the late 60s dropped to like 32 years old.
Yeah.
So you saw that demographic of the country shift and go into television. They followed television there. You had a studio that didn't have the money, didn't have the clout anymore. found their demographic was gone. You had the first generation of what we call the film school generation of American directors who are cutting their teeth on all, as you mentioned earlier, all the new wave movements, the French new wave, the Polish new wave, all these beautiful new waves, the Japanese new wave movements. They're getting art house cinema into America for the first time.
Yeah.
They're these young kids who are innovative. They have no money, so they're allowed to be creative, right? We don't have a budget, you leave the studio and let me try to do that again with that.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
No, you're fine.
So, when you don't have a budget, you're forced to leave the studio and go out into the world. You shoot on location. The lighting is different because you're using naturalistic lighting, right?
Yeah.
Technology has changed. You have Panaflex cameras that you can now go out and do handheld shots. I mean, everything has changed in a moment.
That's the technology we had. We didn't have the other technology at the time.
Exactly. So it's like,
he was one of them, guys.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We could give him shit, but he was an innovator.
He was. So it was radical. This was a radical moment.
Yeah.
And what I love about both the idea of Kaleidoscope and what he actually does in Frenzy, which I'm so thankful and happy that you kind of agreed to us to talk about today, because it's one of my just beloved little Hitchcock films that doesn't get the love it should.
It's interesting because I've been wanting to talk about this film for a while on the show. And Frenzy is, I think when it's pitched to you at a young age, from a trailer or anything like that, you think of Psycho immediately, which is not unfounded. You see a person killing somebody else, you think, oh, it's like a Psycho movie from Hitchcock again. It's decidedly much more of a different approach to it. I think, let's go right off the bat, he pushes the visual boundaries to the nth degree.
Oh, does he?
This is the only time in his filmography that he has pure nudity in it, which is, and it's done in a very violent and very sad way.
Very sad. The closest pushing to the boundary of simulation of sex.
Yeah, exactly. And
violent sex at that.
There's full on terrifying rape and murder scenes in this movie, and the balance that he has of approaching it and also weaving in his man on the run, falsely convicted motif is, I think, proportionally redirected in a way that audiences weren't expecting. If you look at the construction of Frenzy, it almost seems to upend a lot of stuff he established while still standing on the same ground.
And while still revisiting moments of it in there.
And pointing it out.
That's right.
And he points it out in various interesting ways. The story of Frenzy ultimately comes down to a drunk former RAF commander is fired from his job and is trying to, trying to find some money. His friend that he gets a little bit of assistance from is a sexual deviant who murders the RAF squadron leader's ex-wife, and the squadron leader is framed for the murder. Essentially, it's almost like a moment by moment portrayal of how these two characters come to their ultimate fates. With the third edition being the detective on the case.
yes.
Which I love his moments.
Chief Oxford.
I think Alec McCowan is one of those actors who's very good at doing comedy and drama within the same moment. And thankfully, Hitchcock has his food motif throughout the film, which is very important. and we laugh about it, but those scenes with him and his wife at the dinner table are incredibly informative on how both Hitchcock and an audience are processing the violence they've just seen, the attributes of a killer that they are witnessing, and the way we ultimately need to approach the subject going forward. It becomes the full clinical and contemplative and intelligent discussion of it. At the same time, I think ultimately we were talking about in The Lodger how society is portrayed and how it goes further in Rope and Psycho. I think the peak of it is here because this film is very much trying to reckon with current criminal culture, current societal points of view on how a criminal is labeled and treated. It deals a lot with how London functions as a society and what people perceive as its stock and trade. One of the best lines in the movie, in my opinion, is like, if in a way, I wish he wouldn't be caught because it really helps the tourist attraction.
It's so true.
And it's so morbid, but it is so on the money in terms of like a perception. Even if it's not factual, it's a perception that we have.
Right.
Like,
well, yeah, but on some level, there is the factual in. I mean, you're dead on with of Hitchcock's the full employment here of Hitchcock's favorite triptych of ideas, which is sex, death, and food. They're on full display here, and I'll give you exactly what you just said too. Possibly the best use of a cooked piece of meat on a plate to have imbued meaning since Polanski's Repulsion.
Yeah.
I mean, just absolute brilliance here. And yes, even though this is based off of the 1966 novel by LeBurn, which is fictionalized, it does have its case in the Reg Christie case, which is a famous series of murders that took place in England in that same region, which is the Covent Garden region, which you see referenced in the film, where there was a tradesman, a grocer, just like Dad, in a certain region, in the same place where his father used to hold a shop.
Yeah.
But it was based off of a real life case of a man who strangled, raped, and murdered 8 different victims in that time, and had a neighbor who actually was hung for his crimes. Through false imprisonment, and actually led to the reform of the death penalty system in London, or in England rather. So,
and what's interesting is that while this film is also expanding and evolving its ideas about how we perceive these crimes, it's also a very interesting commentary about how we detect the crimes. I fully believe, after rewatching it last night, that the film's ultimate statement from a Hitchcock point of view, other than what we're just discussing, is almost a meta commentary on how characters in his films should no longer suffer the fate that they've been suffering for 20 to 30 years. Because Blaney as a character is wrung through a ringer, but I don't think we get as many moments with him as we say deal with a Cary Grant in North by Northwest. Weird comparison, but
fair. Yeah.
Grant is on the run. We are seeing his struggles and trials and tribulations, but we have a light area fair about it. Blaney's put through hell, and the camera cuts away from him way more than you'd expect. And within that, the point of view of the detective is the most interesting, because he is so sure for the majority of this film that Blaney is guilty that when he flips, it's almost a way of finally making the frustrating characters in a Hitchcock movie self-aware.
Oh God,
they are suddenly aware, oh my gosh, we're detecting wrong. We police bad.
Well, and that great condemnation again of how society views that crime and class must be related somehow, right? Which makes it the perfect bookend to The Lodger, as the whole case of Jack the Ripper was distorted by the idea that a proper British gentleman could never be guilty of such crimes.
Exactly. And one of the best elements of this is how they assume he's guilty because of him being a divorcee, the ideas of love and marriage and how they're dissected and transformed throughout that film. What it ultimately comes down to is a psychosis from a lone individual who has a different peculiarities. Now, as I've said before, the clinical and psychological breakdown in a Hitchcock movie is not even close to medically accurate, but it has its roots in something real, and that's where the legitimacy comes through. The violence on screen in Frenzy is still disturbing. Watching it last night, it was still disturbing. It's exactly what it needs to be. Through a modern lens and a modern context, it tends to. I think people watching it today will be conflicted on how they feel about it. I think ultimately, when you watch the film, you do have to watch it from a couple different angles. This is a serious statement, but it's almost kind of how I look at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's recent release, where you are having to ultimately, in addition to the story elements, you are looking at a filmmaker who's out the door. And that, in the case of Frenzy, I think ultimately what you're watching is Hitchcock, whether he's aware of it or not, making a final statement. Because Family Plot is much more of a fun affair. It's not really heavy. I think it's cheeky. I think it's an adorable film. but Frenzy is a statement.
It is, and it's a full circle statement at that. Remember, we're talking about all of the great French auteurs and critics who basically plucked Hitchcock initially out of what the American critical depositing into the bin of being a trash genre director. It was the French New Wave critics and filmmakers who was like, you have a genius on your hands, and look what he's doing, and brought him into acclaim. And now you have him. He returns to Cannes in 1972 with this film. Truffaut is back by his side, pointing out that this is a last great masterpiece. And it's really kind of sad in a way, too, and this is where the element with Kaleidoscope comes to mind. Because I think I remember when you read the great Hitchcock Truffaut, transcripts, one of the things that you really catches as this beautiful moment is when Hitchcock kind of plaintively tells Truffaut, "I wish sometimes I had your freedom, right? I wish sometimes I had the freedom to do whatever I want, like the new wave artist," right? And now he's in a moment where it's come to America. Right now, all his contemporary directors in America have that freedom for the first time.
And he is able to grasp into it in a way that unfortunately Orson Welles was not able to, primarily because no matter how much you evolve in Hollywood, they're still old.
They're structures.
Old structures, grudges.
That's right.
Opinions about Wells. Fucking Wells was robbed.
Absolutely.
I agree. And like Hitchcock, though, he makes Frenzy, but he's also getting older. He's had a pacemaker at this point.
Yeah.
Alma's having strokes. And I think at a certain point with Family Plot, everybody involved knows it's the end.
It's the end.
And even Hitchcock's aware of it. So Frenzy, within a respect, is like, Family Plot should never be discredited. I think it is a beautiful, fun affair that is a Hitchcock movie. But Frenzy is the final time we see the thing we talk about the most.
That's right.
That's ultimately what it is.
And a masterpiece, but again, being experimental, having the courage to start saying, you know what, I'm gonna take some crazy backward handheld long take out of a room, right? And I'm gonna.
That's my favorite shot.
Right? Isn't that an amazing shot in this film?
My favorite shot in the movie has nothing to do with anything he's wanting me to be amazed with.
I'm with you.
It's something that he's always done. But he's so good at approaching it from a modern lens.
Exactly, right? Yeah, he employs it like he's an American new wave filmmaker, and he's just audacious about it, and he pulls that out. And then he also is completely unafraid within a couple sequences later to throw back an old-fashioned montage, jarring sequence that just comes in and still has the ability to shock you. What I love about this film is that, even again, watching it right now, revisiting it again last night, I found myself still shocked by some moments of violence but of also the filmmaking.
I'll tell you
in the best ways.
I'll tell you, like, the scene with Blaney's ex-wife is still disturbing. However, Rusk digging through the potatoes to find Babs's body,
sequence.
and him having to break the rigor mortis fingers. It's not shocking or scary, but it is the last time I think we really see the purest and most correct form of Hitchcock's humor that you'd see on the television show and in his movies. But I'm speaking mainly from the television show, because this is something that you wish you had seen on the television show. Right. It's so weird because, like, the television show, unfortunately, you can't do all the things you want to do. It's FCC standards. I totally get that, but this is a moment where if Hitchcock were still doing the television show, you might be able to get away with doing it. And in the cracks of the bones, Hitchcock is very good at using sound absolutely only when he needs to. And in this particular moment, I think it's one of the strongest moments of it. Consequently, he also knows when to turn the sound completely off.
That's right.
It seems audacious. Right. And it's funny is that it seems audacious from a new wave perspective, and it totally is. And Bogdanovich even said in the featurette on the Blu-ray that it's a brave, risky, bold move. With all due respect to Bogdanovich and his wonderful ascots, I feel that this is yeah, I know, yeah. Oh, dude, he could put Fred from Scooby-Doo to shame. But he does this multiple times throughout his career. But I think that it's never been as abrupt. So I think what the difference is that's the difference. It's no different from Band of Outsiders, where they turn off the sound. It's very much, I'm going to make you aware of it. it's going to throw you off a bit. It's a bit of fourth wall breaking, but it's also contained within the elements of the story. But he also does the same tricks he's done in the past, where sound is only used when it's necessary.
Right.
And then pure cinema is reached. Like, even when you don't have the line, "You're my type of gal, Babs," as you're doing that pull out, you turn the sound off on this film. For the most part, it works. I think there's only a few sequences where you absolutely need that, the dialogue, which
Right.
I think the beginning of the film needs it with Blaney and his boss at the bar. And I think you do need it from the dinner sequences, only from the sense of, I want those conversations going on in my head. But so this is ultimately the end of our experience with Hitchcock through this motif of lowbrow genre, comments on society, the serial killer motif. Today we have shows like Mindhunter, which are great at approaching the same subjects from an even more sophisticated lens. I actually think that the natural successor to, at the very least, The Lodger, is Zodiac, because of how it deals directly with a recipient of the rage and not the person who's instigating the rage. Or a bystander, I guess you'd call it.
Right.
Zodiac is very much dealing with a person who is so far off to the sidelines compared to the actual people involved in the case. And also Fincher, an intelligent filmmaker, knows how to. He's not using strictly Hitchcockian techniques, but he has them there.
He employs them, right?
Yeah.
He and De Palma basically pick up this mantle and start fucking running.
No, De
right?
Palma dresses himself with it on a nightly basis. De Palma, ladies and gentlemen. It's interesting though how, like, you know, we talk about the filmmakers that take from him, like John Carpenter and whatnot. It's surprising that, you know, I've always felt like no one's made a truly Hitchcockian film beyond it outside of High Anxiety, and that's only because I think High Anxiety knows how to tell an actual Hitchcock story. It's
just directed by someone different.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you look at the framing of that film, there will be. I already planned that there is going to be an episode on High Anxiety.
Marvelous.
It's dedicated solely to High Anxiety and breaking it down frame by frame. And I already have the guest for it. It's awesome. It's going to be awesome. But no one's been able to fully capture the way he presents the information because the ideas have evolved. But the idea of let's take a lowbrow genre and raise it up is supremely relevant today.
Oh my
and
goodness,
it's the backbone of any original idea happening in Hollywood right now from a theatrical standpoint. You know, we kid and we have our opinions about Tarantino, but the bottom line is that he is taking these rather lowbrow things and turning them into a high art. You could argue Edgar Wright does the same thing too, but it all deals with our perception of genre. Like, how do you perceive genre? And I think
That's right.
Over the course of today, we've discussed how subjugating an opinion on a genre is a tricky area that, you know, can have you trip and fall around in. If you just call it what it is, or like aren't ashamed of a label, then you ultimately are able to embrace it on many levels and not just a restricted one. Right. Like, a lot of the films we've talked about, if not all of them, are horror films. And they are horror films through and through. They may be of different eras, they may be of different genres, but they're horror films.
And that's what excites me so much about this legacy with Hitchcock and that elevation of what the lowbrow, right, to the exploitative genre, is that we are now just seeing this beautiful moment in the American horror movement yet again.
Yeah.
Where we have auteurs who are coming out, who all, by the way, I mean, we talk about the 30-year nostalgic cycle, right?
Yeah.
What you see 30 years ago, what influences you as a child, 30 years later, you're either in the position to make art that reflects it, or to be demanding art that gives you the nostalgic bump, the key bump that you need to manifest your way in the world again. And so you now have this great generation of directors right now within the horror genre who are revisiting that and revisiting the auteurs of that time period, these European auteurs again, being like, you know, I mean, like, hell, you had that one year where you had basically, Astor and, Schultz, Astor, and I'm trying to think of the other director here, but Aronofsky, who basically all just did their own version of Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
Within like a 2-year period, this entire generation of new horror filmmakers were like, let's just recycle Polanski because it worked then and it should work now. So I'm loving that we're in that moment again where we can revisit that.
And I think we're still in that. We're in the cyclical era in the respect of like the 80s as innovative as it is in certain senses. The 80s I think is totally dominated by commercial fare. Some good, some bad, some masterpieces. But we're nearing a point right now, especially with the emergence of people like Jordan Peele and Ari Aster and even Greta Gerwig and Jennifer Kent, who did The Babadook.
And now The Nightingale.
Which I need to see. You are seeing people, I think, emerge similarly the way they did from the 90s, where individual voices are coming back to the fold. I think we're going to have a couple more years of predominant IP before we really see any kind of shift, if at all, because again, the dynamics of the business are changing, and that's ultimately what's at hand. Right. It's not even the content anymore, because you can get the content wherever. It's about how the business itself is going to change.
But from a historical moment, in American history at least, it's a watershed, right? Because, you're talking about like one of the only nations on Earth that has never been able to be reflective that sounds terrible. Before I'm taken out of context. What I mean is more of just, it can never be introspective to its own demons. Like part of our national construct is not to be, right? And I think that's what's always made us kind of veer down a different road from the European horror filmmakers that are looking at the internalization. Look at the horrors of and anxieties about ourselves, society, our legacy, our collective guilt. And America is basically who we are. Our branding is to never go that route and look at it.
We get distracted when it's convenient.
Exactly.
That's that. We can't sit down for too long, and I think that at the end of the day, if we're to take anything from Hitchcock in terms of today, I think the best example that you can see of it is Jordan Peele. I think Peele, some would argue Ari Aster, and I don't disagree with that, but I think that Aster is also drawing from very different corners of cinema.
I agree. I think he's more of a Polanski.
I agree. I agree. He very much has the ideas of Repulsion and Rosemary's Baby stuck in his head. I think Peele, while he gravitates towards some of those similar themes, Peele understands, because of his background in comedy, how to appeal to the audience, and he knows how to write for the audience. Us is one of the best films I've seen this year, solely because it is able to address an issue from a broad perspective. It's interesting how much Us is a Hitchcock movie in supreme disguise, because you wouldn't think of it right away, but there are vague descriptions of things in Hitchcock films throughout, like, government secrets. I don't know. That's what's after you, Cary Grant. That same vagary works supremely well in Us, but we are so sophisticated that I think critics and sometimes fans get muddled in why there's not enough detail or like thorough explanation of things. And I've come to the conclusion of the past couple of months that I think we're supremely devoid of being able to accept things, not blindly, but just like you've got to run with something, like and be more concerned with the overall feeling than the supremely tiny details. Like Hitchcock wants those details in his film so that the film breathes on a broad spectrum. He doesn't try to do it so that you notice them each time.
Yeah.
And we are a dissective culture, especially with the internet. So I think that there's a definite approach to cinema and how we read it that becomes too intricate at times, whereas sometimes you need to sit back. Like the twist in Us, much like the twist in A Psycho and whatnot, is not necessarily the most important thing in the film, but it breathes a new way of reading the story that still works as a through line. And I'm learning recently that The Sixth Sense does operate that way.
Absolutely,
it's easy to throw that film under a bus.
Oh no!
But I think that rewatching that film and rediscovering it, it is definitely a film that works even though you know the twist. I think it doesn't work as well as other films, but it does it really well because it has an emotional core to it too, and that broad emotional sense is what appeals to you, and that's what Hitchcock did. Hitchcock appealed on a broad emotional sense because he knew the things to tap into.
Again, the eternal populace, and I'm so glad you just said that about Jordan Peele. That was going to be my surprise shocker I was going to drop on you, too. I love that two minds think alike in this way. I couldn't agree with you more.
Also, Keanu should have won a Best Screenplay Oscar in 2016. I will never drop that.
But no, it's absolutely fundamentally correct over there. And both of these directors now are that perfect bridge for blending, once again, high contextual, intellectual art with grand themes and metaphors through a genre that can also just be enjoyed and appreciated through its own reactive, low sensibilities as well. I was astonished, like the audience divided when the lights came up on us. If you can just read this purely as a horror film, and it is masterfully done as a horror film. If you go back and look at its entire ideas with current geopolitics and class inequality and everything that's happening right now too, it is an entirely different film. And I would argue too, just like you, that very few people have been able to do that successfully and still play through popular culture the way they have successfully, like Peele has as a modern successor to Hitchcock.
Exactly. And he's, it's a Rorschach of a movie, Us is, and Hitchcock has done similar work within that respect to I think it's mainly just how the audience reacts, not necessarily from the themes, but just the reactions and stuff. Psycho was a very divisive film in its time. I think The Birds has a similar reaction. I think The Birds really took a while to get the respectable following that it has today.
Even Vertigo.
Vertigo is the clear-cut example of that. And I'd argue that I think it still needs to have a little more ascension, but The Trouble with Harry has a lot of that.
Good call.
Trouble with Harry is a wonderful film that doesn't get talked about for obvious reasons, but it's a really good film. And Rope definitely has been through that ringer.
I'm waiting for that big critical reevaluation.
Rope, I think needs to be looked at again, especially when we have people like Inarritu really pushing the one take motif and the VR experience. There's that element, and if we go all the way back to the story of the London Fog that started this whole conversation. There is our understanding and our perception of the Lurid and the CD is much more sophisticated thanks to people like Hitchcock. Because if we don't have those bridges in the pop culture, beyond pop culture, we can't talk about it further.
That's right.
We have to have a basis point of discussion in order to have those discussions that then move into the important realms of science, politics, technology, medicine, things that are done by people that are much more important than you and I sitting down talking about moving pictures. Like it's almost like denigrating to say to the art of cinema, but it's just like, yeah, doctors are more important.
What? No, but you're exactly right too. It's also Hitchcock. I mean, look at this moment we're in. It's also, from beyond the grave, Hitch can snarkily poke us with his stick that he tried to show us early on when he first began flashing the golden curls at us. I mean, like right now, we're here doing this podcast, and there's no place on earth I'd rather be than with you here right now discussing this film. But the modern state of the podcast right now, I think I saw that 8 of the top 10 most successful genres of the new podcasts that are out are all within the true crime, sensationalist, revisitation of the cautionary crime tale on modern society.
Which at times to me personally feels alarming, but
it should.
It's also very positive because it is, it's a subject that's, it has a reason to be there because it's how we understand and break down our views on society, our different moral codes. And I actually would further that, thanks to, podcasts being able to share older radio, we're also seeing a rebirth of how to dramatize audibly, which is important to me. But I think ultimately with Hitch's ultimate influence on this is that he has kept a conversation alive.
Exactly.
And he has further elevated how we process that information. Thank you very much, Jack, for sitting down and chatting with me.
Thank you for having me.
And I need to have you back at the very least one more time, if not more, for before we end this whole mini-series. And then I will definitely have you on for when I do my series on John Huston, which is This Fucker Wants to Kill an Elephant.
I will come back at any time, and I'll be working on my Jimmy Stewart.
There we go. Perfect. Really quickly, do you want to plug anything before you leave our good graces?
Well, I mean, I think I'm just going to I would like to just, again, thank your listening audience for enduring me bloviating here for a while. And just mention again, Crested Butte Film Festival is coming up. It's always the last weekend in September, and I would urge people to go check that out or come and visit it. It's a marvelous thing, and I will try to emulate your amazing podcast with the history of you in 5 films. To be looking for it soon.
Awesome. I cannot wait, by the way. I cannot wait to listen. It's going to rock. That's been it for the Shamley Silhouette this week. We've talked about The Lodger, Rope, Psycho, Frenzy. These are all films you can check out on Blu-ray. They're all available in glorious HD formats. Please find them that way. Don't buy them bootleg, guys. That's ridiculous. You can follow me on Instagram at RealNerdZach. You can check out all the articles and the episodes of the Shamley Silhouette on RealNerdsPodcast.com and the Real Nerds Podcast feed on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, all the good places you can get your podcasts, and you can listen to other things there too. I'm sure there's plenty of shows available for y'all to listen to. Next time, I don't know what we'll be talking about because this will be the end of all the things I've been pre-recording in advance. So it's a mystery. So stay tuned because we've got more Hitchcock goodness coming your way. We don't see an end in sight as of now, but I think we'll have to at some point because this subject can only go on for so long.
I don't want
guys.
the experiment.
Yeah, no, exactly. I want 80 episodes. I want 80 episodes for the 80 minutes that Rope made me sit through. Because I'm going to torture people the way that droll fat British man did. But anyway, this has been the Shamley Silhouette. Until next time, good night.